this is Dana and welcome to the Orchid Hut. In today's video, I am surrounded by a jungle of Phalaenopsis orchids. And the purpose of today's video is to look at the Phalaenopsis orchids that have been repotted over the course of weeks and months to check in on how they are growing. So primarily today, we're looking at root systems through the clear pots, and we're looking at leaf growth from the top of the plant. And because all orchids are absolutely different from one another, this is why I always bring so many examples to the videos here, because there is a lot that is perfectly normal. And every orchid is different, so some are going to grow faster than others, some are going to respond to being repotted sooner than others, and so that's the reason why we're going to take a look at so many plants today. Now, I do have some notes here to kind of help me remember when these were repotted, and as we go along, if I made a video of the repot, I will put a link in the upper right hand corner of the screen so you can go watch that repot video if you choose to. And this is video number 9 in the Neophyte series, and if you've been following along with that playlist, we started off with talking about how to begin your orchid growing hobby to sort of not experience any undue frustration. And we talked about how to shop for a healthy Phalaenopsis orchid. We're following 6 Phalaenopsis in my collection over the course of a year so that you can see how they progress through the different growth cycles during the year. And there's lots of great videos in that playlist, so if you haven't checked it out, this is number 9, and there are 8 Neophyte videos prior to this one. Okay, so let's get started. And I'm going to move one out of the way here just so that what's in front of the camera is a bit more clear. These 3 orchids in front of the camera were all potted on the very same day. It was a trio of Phalaenopsis repots, and I'll put that link in the upper right hand corner of the screen. And these were repotted 2.5 weeks ago. So in that amount of time, I really would not expect to see all that much growth progress. However, I am looking to make sure that what's in the pot is doing okay. Now, all of the orchids that I'm going to show you today were watered this morning, so their roots are going to show up bright green instead of that silvery gray color. And I think that's probably a bit better for filming anyway, because the bright green shows up on the camera a bit better. So let's start with this one. Whoops, I'm about to have one here be unpotted. And accidents like that happen. And when an orchid accidentally tips over and gets unpotted, you just kind of hurry up and repot it as best as you can, as quick as you can, and hope that the orchid didn't notice. Okay, so here's the first one. Now, this one was not in a clear pot previously, so when I unpotted it, it was really the first time I was able to see the root system. And what I can tell now is that the root system is, hanging in there. It's not like there's any kind of dieback or anything. I'm still seeing, healthy roots inside the pot, although I am not seeing any kind of new root growth. And at the top of the plant, there may be the slightest indication that a new leaf is starting to bud right there, but this one is still kind of just hanging out from having been repotted. Today was the first time it got a little bit of weak fertilizer. I had been keeping it evenly moist for the first 2 weeks that it was repotted, and today was the first day that it got a little bit of food, and I'm going to be moving it back to a location that has just a tiny bit more light. Okay, that's the first one. And then the second orchid that was repotted 2.5 weeks ago is the Long Pride Helly. This was the one that was in the sphagnum moss, and the root system was you know, in better shape than you might imagine, being in that sphagnum moss. But now that I've watered it, I can see that the roots are green. I'm not seeing any roots, you know, that have died back or anything. It is getting a new leaf at the top of the plant, so that's encouraging. All right, and the third orchid that was repotted 2.5 weeks ago is this one. And this one has a little bit of a unique situation. There were quite a few air roots, and I did my trick where I wrapped them around but at the top of the pot, and you can see that these have greened up because I've watered it. But the good news is that these have not died back, and that is one thing that can happen, and I'll show you an example later on in one of the other Phalaenopsis orchids where some of those air roots are probably not going to make it. But you know, that's encouraging that those air roots are still turning green. No other new root growth, but the leaf, the new leaf at the top of the plant is well underway. All right, so let's move on now to the orchid that was potted back in December. So that was about 6.5 months ago. So this one has been in this pot for about half a year. Now, repotting a Phalaenopsis orchid is not something that you typically do in December, but I had purchased this one late in the year in bloom, and by the time it went out of bloom and needed to be repotted, it happened to be December. So the bloom cycle for this Phalaenopsis is just off. It's just off. And, you know, it did not bloom for me during the normal blooming time for my plants. But it was kind of like it was smart, because it decided, you know what, I think I need to grow before I bloom again. And I'll put a link in the upper right hand corner of the screen for the repot on this one. This is the Sweetie Cat Phalaenopsis. And you can see new root tips right here, and nice green roots. And yeah, I do believe this one is kind of happy. It's got a brand new root coming out of the bottom of the pot. New root tip right here. So this orchid knew that it needed to grow before blooming again, and new leaf right there at the top of the plant. So I imagine that this one will spike for me in the fall, winter of 2022. Okay, so that's that one. And then this orchid was a grocery store purchase, and it was repotted about 2 weeks before the one I just showed you. So probably more like about 7 months ago. And again, it was not in the bloom cycle of the rest of my plants. So it chose not to bloom during the last blooming season, which was fine. But it did grow this new leaf in that time, and now it's even getting another gorgeous mottled leaf right here. And inside the pot, new root tips there. All the other roots are looking green and healthy, not dying or anything like that. So, you know, this one is working on vegetative growth and root growth, which is exactly what we want. And it will probably bloom for me again at the end of 2022, or at least set a spike then. Okay, and the next one, and this one has kind of gotten out of order here. So let me kind of backtrack just a bit. This was the ultimate Phalaenopsis repot that was actually in this Neophyte playlist. And this one was repotted in the middle of May, so that was about maybe 6 weeks ago. And this was the very first orchid, in fact, where I demonstrated how to wrap around some of the aerial roots in the hopes that they would, you know, kind of take off and become roots that would sustain themselves inside the media. You can still see the paper clip that's holding down some of those aerial roots. And, you know, there's kind of a bit of mixed results here, which is what you would expect. There are some roots right here that are still staying green, but you can also see one of the aerial roots that I wrapped around right here has died, and that is to be expected. But these new roots right here, these new little root tips, that's a great sign. And here's another new little root tip. Here are some more new root tips right here. So some of the aerial roots that are wrapped around at the top of the pot will probably be okay. There is one though that has shriveled and died, but that's okay. And even some of these air roots that are higher up on the stem of the plant are actually pointing themselves down into the media. So this one is doing well. Lots of great new growth for just being repotted 6 weeks, and a new leaf on top as well. Okay, and then the final one, and I hate to, I guess, end on a sad note. Well, it's not really a sad note, but it's not the most positive note. This one was repotted in September of last year. So it has been in this pot for many months. In fact, longer than any of the orchids that I've shown you in this video. And it has grown a new leaf in that time. However, this leaf, is not as large as the previous leaves. Now, when I repotted this one, and again, I'll put a link in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, it was in some tight sphagnum moss, and I had to pull all of that off. And I imagine coming into this potting setup was, a bit of a shock. But a live root right here, that's great. Some live root activity right here, live root here, maybe even just the tiniest of a new root tip right there. But then also a root that has died right along here. So this one, is not doing as well as what I would hope after all of these months, but I'm imagining that the shock of repotting it was pretty severe because of how it was potted when it was a young plant, and it's just going to take, a little bit of time, I think, for this one to, I guess, take off and grow. Now, it did decide to bloom over the fall/winter of last year, and I cut off that spike kind of early. It only had, I think, like maybe 2 or 3 buds on it, but I cut that spike off early because I knew that this plant needed to focus its energy on vegetative and root growth. So I'm going to cross my fingers that taking that spike off relatively early will allow this plant to pick up just a bit. Okay, so that's an update on Phalaenopsis orchids that have been repotted in the last 8 months, 6 months, 3 months, last few weeks, and how they are doing, and what the great signs are that repotting these orchids actually benefited them. All right, so if you learned something new or just enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. The subscribe button will be coming up in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. Don't forget to watch the other videos in the Neophyte series, and talk to you next time.